up, Internet? We must fight this terror with the rule of law and not the barrel of a gun. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And Norway's not on trial. You are. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film 22 July.
I noticed your tone's a little quieter today.
Well,
you're a little bit. And I totally understand, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I could redo it and I could amp it up like a
No.
loud clown.
I completely understand. I think you're taking the appropriate tenor for this particular film.
Thanks for calling it out. How you doing, Shahir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm glad you turned me on to this film.
Oh, I turn you on all the time.
To films consistently. I'm not always glad to the ones you turn me on to, but this one in particular, we had a list of possibilities this week.
Yeah, we're in that strange period where like there are big movies coming out that I think we really really want to do, but there are gaps between them where it's like suddenly we're in this, like this week for example, we were in this, we were like, oh, we could go see this, and we've just got so many options of things that we think might be interesting.
Yeah.
And again, our criteria isn't necessarily is this a movie we're dying to see, because I think a lot of times there are some films, for example, I really want to see, which I don't think will make a great conversation.
Sure.
And and then there are other films which I think I don't really want to see, but I think will make a great conversation to discuss. And then, do you have that? I always think about that.
Yes and no. I mean, look, I am a talker. I could nitpick down literally anything and try. I think make it interesting, or at least have an enjoyable conversation to the point, like even last night with extra credits, we're doing this thing. We're doing a book club every Tuesday. You can come at 8 p.m. EST, and we're reading Dune if you'd like to read that. We read chapters 5 and 6 last night. I think it's a total of like 17 pages. Like it's not long, and we spent 2 hours on 17 pages.
Right. No, it's not. It's not so much that we wouldn't have anything to talk about. I think I think my criteria is, would we have an interesting angle on this that
other people don't,
or that is unique to what your and I opinions are.
I think sometimes I get the trepidation, because 100% I've been like, look, even more in my wheelhouse, which I'm so sad this is my wheelhouse, Venom. We're not really going to do Venom, I don't think, but I've been asked by almost everyone I know, down to people being like, oh, I haven't listened to your Venom episode yet. And I'm like, we didn't do it, nor are we planning on it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I have no opposition to doing Venom. I can't see an interesting angle on that film that we would have at this point.
Exactly. Though to be fair, we both haven't seen Venom.
That's true.
But at the same time, all of the articles that I've read about Venom seem like they're trying to make a narrative out of something that is just sort of like an okay old feeling film.
Right.
And I don't know if I feel like jumping into that conversation, especially when this is where I'll sort of come back to your original question. I like the idea of trying to pick our films and being careful of what we actually decide to do, not because I don't think we couldn't, say, have an interesting conversation about Venom, but is there another film or another thing that either is more culturally appropriate or that we could get an even better conversation out of somewhere else?
For example, in the case of Venom, I know it was kind of a joke that the film Life was kind of like an unofficial prequel to Venom, but I still think of it that way, and I think and that makes that film interesting, and I think that would make an interesting Venom film.
Oh yeah,
and maybe that would be our angle into the Venom conversation.
I would have to watch them both back to back to make sure that we could make all the connections. And I might do that maybe on my own. I might start my own zine. You don't know.
But regardless, we had in sort of an empty gap this week. We are still working on our bigger sort of, I guess you could call them tentpole episodes that we've been working on, which is broader conversation topics like art versus separating art from the artist and violence on screen. Plus, we still have one more listener requested review to do. But those take a little bit more run up. We're trying to get interesting guests for those. And this was just one of those weeks where we had kind of an empty week, and we did have a couple of really interesting options.
Yes.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about Netflix right now, because I have to say 3 of my most anticipated films of the year are gonna be on Netflix. And I think 3 and it's really striking to me that 3 arguably of the most interesting filmmakers on the planet are choosing to make their films released on Netflix, and that's obviously Paul Greengrass with 22 July, which is why I wanted to see this film. That's Alfonso Cuarón with Roma, and that's the Coen brothers with The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Buster Scruggs or something Scruggs. The notion that they are now tapping in, or they have enough clout to attract directors of that caliber to do their next features with them, I think is really it's fascinating. It's intriguing. I'm very excited about it. There's the backlash to it is the notion that these films don't necessarily get a theatrical release. Although, I think in all three of these cases they are doing a theatrical run. But if you're not that, if you're not that invested in it, like, why would you go see it at the movies? If it's something that you're not excited about, like I am.
Right.
So it's Netflix is come a long way.
And you say clout, I say money. Because and again, this is not a downplay of anything about that. It's just, look, if someone went to any prominent director that doesn't really have a hang up about the sort of new technology of how films are being shown, and said, here's a bunch of money, by the way, you can do whatever you want with it. I don't see any director that doesn't have like that, really, like Christopher Nolan hard line in the sand, which they're perfectly,
right.
Of course they can have.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think the balance of the equation feels a little bit more like, here's the money to do the thing you want, and we won't have any hang-ups about it. Like, you basically can release it. And I think some directors would be like, well, I want to make it and have it seen. And other directors, like in the case of Alfonso Cuarón doing Roma, I'm so excited about that movie because it seems like a return to the kinds of films like Y Tu Mama También,
right?
That he made in his early career. So what I'm excited there is, like, he's not tethered to, like, I have to make a studio film, I have to make it PG, I have to make sure it's going to target this demographic. He's just like, I'm just going to make the movie,
right?
And that's what I'm excited about. So regardless, the fact that a Paul Greengrass film was being released on Netflix fairly inauspiciously, kind of just dropped on the middle. Is today Tuesday? Today's Tuesday, right?
Today's Wednesday.
Oh,
Get in the game, Shahir. I know, our week's flying by.
I don't keep calendars like one of our Supreme Court justices, but yeah, no, like the fact that in our assessment of, like, what are the week's releases, we could go, oh, there's a Paul Greengrass movie being released on Netflix tomorrow morning. We could watch that.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty great time.
It's a great time for people that are seeking out film. I do worry. Well, I have a thing that I'll get into sort of later in our discussion of this film, but this is, I guess, maybe like 20% of it. Like, I worry about the audience for this film.
Okay.
And, like, who will see it, who needs to see it, when will they see it, how will they, and with Netflix, especially because I didn't see an advertisement for this at all.
Yeah.
It never crossed my thing. Whatever. I think Netflix's algorithm of what it shows you is a little bit odd,
right?
And I would say slightly busted in a sense of, like, because I watched an episode of Bob's Burgers, like, I literally only get stand-up specials,
right?
In my, like, stupid thing that plays the trailer. Oh, and this is the other thing, that if we're talking to Netflix, let's just talk to them. I don't want this autoplay nonsense on anymore. And Netflix, if you're gonna autoplay, I understand you need to do it. Stop making every trailer for everything, be it a blockbuster film, a stand-up special, a TV show from 20 years ago. Stop making the trailers the exact same cookie-cutter style. It's do-do-do-do-do-do, words on the screen, do-do-do-do-do-do, words on the screen. And I'm like, I was watching them all. I'm like, there's one person doing all of these.
I would venture to guess it's an algorithm doing it more than anything.
Probably,
but regardless, the thing, I went to the New York Film Festival over the weekend and I saw Hirokazu Koreeda's new film Shoplifters. And the thing that that question of, like, who's going to find this film, the thing that I was reminded of, because I don't go to the film festival often, it's expensive, it's out of my way, and I'm always like, I'll see these movies eventually. Is the passion people have for film. Like, that Shoplifters was a film that had a entirely sold out screening, at the Lincoln Center, which is a very big theater. And what was cool about it, that happened on the way. By the way, shout out to my friend Zach for buying me a ticket.
Thanks, Zach.
Was that afterwards we was walking out and everyone wanted to talk about the movie, and I struck up a conversation with 2 or 3 other people about what we had just seen to discuss it, and I was like, oh, people are excited about movies. Just because we make a presumption that Shoplifters isn't going to like hit the blockbuster mainstream theater doesn't mean there are thousands upon thousands and an audience for that movie that are going to be excited about it. They're going to talk about it. You know, like I tweeted about going to see Shoplifters, and I had so many tweets come back to me about people asking me about that film, whether they should go see it. And there was like, oh yeah, just because Venom is out and Avengers comes out doesn't mean people aren't interested in seeing things that aren't those movies.
I think there's a sweet spot of internet conversation before it gets to pedantics.
Right.
Like for a number of people that are saying, it's like, so for instance, if a smaller film or lesser known thing that's not being blasted across the airwaves 24/7 with advertising comes along, then people are still hungry for searching for discussion about that film.
Right.
And they will go on Twitter and Instagram or whatever
Yeah.
and search hashtags and figure things out. And you tweeted about a film that other people are excited about, so they're going to actively search for other people. But I do think that a lot of times, like, I bet you, as far as real life people go, I bet you that more people tweeted about the film you saw and like were actively looking for longer periods of time than say people were looking for information on Venom.
Right.
Because Venom, the information's all there all the time. You can't get away from it.
Right. I think my point there was that there's a lot of people that,
Yeah.
you know, there's more people than you would think or that you imagine. I guess in our head, we kind of come up with our own algorithms about like what we think will be popular and what we think won't be popular.
Head algorithms.
And there's a lot of people, you know, we're not capable entirely of like figuring that out, you know, just by our imagination. And it's much bigger than we would think.
Right.
So the amount of people that at least I see excited about Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, you know, far outweighs anyone talking about Venom.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of, and I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Netflix does have an algorithm issue, and I think it comes down to this algorithmic recommendation system.
Sure.
Which is that, like, do we want things that are similar to the things we've seen, or do we want things that extend what we've seen into other areas?
Right.
And that's a really, like, can a computer figure that out?
Well, here's the thing. I 100% believe this, and maybe my musical tastes are simpler than most. I have no idea.
Right.
But Spotify has nailed whatever algorithm it has to find me new music, and not like all pop. In fact, none of it's really popular music,
Yeah.
but based off of the regular stuff, some popular, some not, that I listen to. When I go on there looking for a new track, I will always find something to put in like a playlist to replay. Like it's sort of like weekly playlist for you. Starts with like 3 or 4 songs you're familiar with, and then like here's some shit you've never heard, but it's always something that's in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mean, I'm sure it is, but algorithmically, it's probably easier to figure out based on like beats per minute and like tempo and all that sort of stuff and instrumentation stuff. Probably easier to figure out a human's musical tastes more than their visual tastes.
I also think music is easier in that there's not as much of a time investment on the listener.
Yeah, that's
You know,
100% true.
Like it's harder to like get people invested in 2 hours to a movie
Yeah.
that they may only have a passing interest in, whereas it's easy to get them interested in like
That's
3
very
minutes
true.
of a song. Regardless, we're 22 July is available right now on Netflix. And if you haven't watched it at this point, most of you, I'm sure, listening in have a Netflix account. You can, and worldwide will have access to this film. That's the other great thing about Netflix is that the movies get released entirely across the planet.
Yeah.
So you can stop right now, although I don't encourage you to stop, but stop.
If you haven't watched it yet, you can stop now.
And listen, and then
come on back.
Tick, tock, tock. We're back.
Wow, that was a lovely clock sound. And just sort of wrapping up our last conversation, now that they've all seen the film,
Yeah.
and we've just talked about different sizes of communities watching different sizes of films and being larger or smaller than we think. Our community, for the only podcast about movies, keeps getting larger than I ever expected to.
Yeah, it's always great.
So thank you, everyone who writes in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at onlymoviepod on Twitter. For a lot of stuff we've gotten in, we've gotten some Venom stuff, we've gotten some A Star Is Born stuff.
As I think both of us predicted, this is a film that's going to generate conversation. I really like seeing that there's a conversation around this movie that's going, like I'm part of a mom's group on
Okay.
Facebook, because I'm a parent.
Cool.
And and all the moms are talking about this movie, and all the moms want to are trying to figure out times that they can go and see this movie, with daycare providers and with childcare providers.
Well, slide into their DMs respectfully and give them the link to our podcast.
I've avoided doing that.
Do it.
Do it. All I've said, because there's a couple of them were like, oh, should I go to a mom and me session? All I've said is, I think the film is very good. I also think it's very loud. That's all I've said.
Oh, yeah, no, don't bring the kid to it.
No, they have special mommy and me sessions for A Star is Born.
But did they turn the sound down?
I'm presuming they do. So in mommy and me sessions, they leave the house lights up slightly, and I don't think the sound is as loud.
Cool.
Which is really nice because as a parent, it's hard to get to a movie sometimes. Our friend Stephen Buja on the Oscar Watch podcast often goes to those sessions, and I think it's great.
Nice.
But regardless, A Star is Born has generated enough conversation on our podcast with a couple of emails coming in. One from Jamesa, who is a favorite emailer of ours. We really enjoy her emails coming in. And again, I think it's just a case of people wanting to talk about this movie after having seen it. I want to just pick and choose a couple of moments here.
Pick away.
I think the thing here is, so this is from Jamesa. There are mixed emotion when it comes to the character of Allie. While on one hand, I understand the desire to be a star, I did not like how she went about it and the dismissiveness she had towards Jack when she had attention from that A-hat Rez, that is their agent. Her insecurities were the driving force to losing her identity and voice in a sea of pop artists. And I wrote, again, Jamesa sent us a really lovely email. I think 90% of what she said we are on board with. I think that was the only point where I was like, oh, I think I have a slightly different take on it, which is that I think the issue there was that Jake, what do you call him? Jackson? Jack?
Jack, yeah.
Okay. Needed to kind of take a back seat to her career and allow her the space to kind of make her own mistakes. But that's not necessarily what the film is about. So
no.
I just, again, I see Jamesa's point there, but I didn't really agree with it in terms of what I think needed to happen. But I think what she's mentioning there is that the film kind of sides with Jackson's assessment of what kind of artist Allie should be.
Oh yeah, because even if you look at the stylings of her as a pop star, it's done to be auspiciously bad.
Yeah,
anyone who dabbles in music can see they're like, and this is the cookie cutter's impression of a cookie cutter at this point. So the film itself is definitely siding with just from the way it presents the story, it's siding with Jackson Maine. But the whole him having to take a back seat to it, I mean, what he's really taking a back seat to is his own demons.
Is his own and it's also his own career kind of coming to
which he's doing himself. It's not
with no spoilers. We don't want to give too much away with that. But thank you, Jamesa, for that email. Also, Maya sending us an email with some similar comments about Allie's ability as a pop star. And, the question she asked in this email is Allie a feminist character? I think it's a little difficult to read it that way, but I think you could make a reading, and I kind of attempted to in an email back to her. But the other thing that Maya mentioned that I forgot to mention, and I just want to bring it up in this podcast as well, was the cinematography of the film, which looked great. It was shot by a cinematographer by the name of Matthew Libatique, whose films you would have definitely seen, because not only has he shot a film like A Star is Born, he actually also shot Venom, which came out on the same day. But he also shot a couple of your favorite movies. He shot Iron Man 2, and he shot Mother, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he shot Black Swan. So he's worked with Darren Aronofsky and on sort of more independent indie films and on big budget sort of blockbuster movies.
Man, on that premiere day, he must have been running back and forth from the different theaters.
Wow.
Star is Born into Venom.
If he's taking any cues from Tom Hardy, he was probably just staying in the Star is Born theater and
oh no.
But the point there was that I think the cinematography was noticeably gritty and not broad and open like I think a La La Land would have been, because the film, while it enjoys the music, is not there to celebrate the scope of them as artists. It's there to kind of immerse us in the emotional depth of what their music means to those characters. So I think it was a really smart choice to use Lee Batik, and I think he probably chose Lee Batik based on something like Black Swan or Mother.
Yeah.
So that was really great. Thanks, Maya. Also, we had another great conversation. Oh, not really a conversation. I just made a comment, to be honest. It was a one-sided conversation.
It was a great comment that Shahir made. Just know that in an email chain to a listener, Shahir made a great comment.
And I just want to bring it up because I thought it was a great comment, but it was just something, again, I forgot to mention, which was that I thought the makeup in A Star Is Born was really effective.
Oh, yeah.
The way that they did Allie's makeup from the beginning to the end, where it transitioned from being kind of very natural to something very highly made up, where she kind of enters pop stardom, and then taking it back when she, towards the end of the film for reasons we won't go into.
Yeah.
Again, thank you, listeners, for those emails. Please email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod. Also, don't forget to leave us iTunes reviews. We've been getting a few of those recently. They are the key. If we are the if we're the gatekeepers and they're the key masters, is that how it works?
Yeah. Then if you're asked if you're a god, say yes.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
I am Zool. Please write us an iTunes review if you like us, or even if you don't like us.
You could just write "I am Zool" in the review, and then give however many stars you'd like.
Yeah, the real dick move would be "I am Zool," 1 star.
Oh, I mean, I won't malign you because you're an ancient evil deity, but at the same time, dick move, ancient evil deity.
Well, if Zool's plan was anything but a dick move, then it wouldn't be.
I mean, true to character.
True to character.
All right,
moving on. Paul Greengrass returns after the last film he did was Captain Phillips, was it not?
I believe so.
Did you see Captain Phillips?
I didn't.
Very good.
That's what I heard. It slipped through my fingers.
He was dangling in front of you.
It was like, the sands of time and the time to see this movie. It will be a film, I guarantee you, and this happens every once in a while in my life. One that I was like, I want to see it. Forget about it. Then there's going to be a weird serendipitous moment where it's either playing somewhere or it's streaming or like something. It just comes up and I happen to have the time.
Right.
And it'll be a lovely surprise and I'll kick myself for not.
True to form, though, Captain Phillips wasn't actually his last film. Jason Bourne was, and I had completely forgotten that he made
the new one?
Yeah, he made the 4th installment to the Jason Bourne. They supposedly return to the franchise after they kind of veered off with Jeremy Renner. And then decided to come back with Matt Damon. I completely forgot about that. I also didn't see his other film, Green Zone, with Matt Damon, which I heard was very good as well.
One part of my brain knew that there was a 2016 Bourne film.
Right.
The other part had literally no idea. I don't know.
I don't think you needed to. I don't think anyone needs to. I mean, maybe there are hardcore Jason Bourne fans who could write us in and tell us why Jason Bourne, the 2016 4th film in the franchise, is the one to watch. But Greengrass has made his
Isn't
career...
it the 5th in the franchise? Because they did one with Renner.
That was the... Oh, yeah, so you're right. Yeah. This would be the fifth one. You're absolutely right. But Greengrass has made a career out of what I would call political action movies.
Yes.
Starting with his first film about the IRA, the Bloody Sunday, moving through to... surprisingly jumping straight into Bourne Supremacy, but returning to, I think, what is iconically Paul Greengrass with United 93, which I think is superb. It's an excellent depiction. And I think if you are entrusting any filmmaker in the world with the retelling of a true event, a true tragic event, you could do no better than Paul Greengrass, because while he will make it... while he has all the skills to make it as exciting and tense and suspenseful as possible, as he demonstrated with his Bourne films,
right?
He is also smartly politically minded, not to misguide the film into the wrong territory, and not to make the action overwhelm the meaning of the film.
Right.
So you could do no better than Paul Greengrass. And this is obviously a film in what has sadly become a genre of films, which is the mass shooting film. I had just a couple of weeks, maybe a month ago, just watched Denis Villeneuve's, I think it was his 2nd or 3rd film, Polytechnic. So I kind of had I was thinking a lot about mass shootings. And mass shootings in the rest of the world, I think, means something different than they do in America.
Because America, it means it's Tuesday.
Yeah, there's something about mass shootings in the rest of the planet. that makes mass shootings very, very different to what they mean in America. Obviously, in America, emboldened by the Parkland survivors, there is a movement to spark the conversation about mass shootings in America and why. And the question I think in America is why are they so prolific?
Yeah,
I think the question around the world, which is the question for 22 July, is what do they mean?
Yes. Real quick, I know I just kind of made an offside thing about the Must Be Tuesday sort of thing. Right. I don't mean to make trite of it, but the fact of the matter is that's what the current United States government kind of is doing with mass shootings. And I understand it's a complicated topic, and I understand there are a lot of sides to read upon.
Yeah.
But that my initial gut reaction comes from a very real place of people in power not doing enough to prevent them on our shores. So I 100%. I just wanted to kind of clear that up because I felt like I really sort of just meh.
And I agree, as well as like remembering that we are a movie review or a movie conversation podcast. We are not in any way discussing the actual politics of mass shootings,
right,
and the realities of mass shootings, although they will come into play. But we are discussing the reaction from filmmakers to how to depict mass shootings,
right,
and what the depictions of mass shootings mean. So I think that's something interesting. I guess for American audiences, there might, I think your response, which is that it's just a Tuesday, it was something that was actually echoed by a survivor in a recent shooting. In an interview, a young girl said something like, "Well, I knew it was going to happen to us eventually," which is, I think, the saddest thing you can say about a mass shooting. But in that question of depiction, there have been a fair amount of movies about mass shootings, about the fallout of mass shootings. I mentioned Polytechnic. Maybe the most famous one is Gus Van Sant's film Elephant. There's obviously interesting sort of movies around mass shootings, like we need to talk about Kevin, Lynn Ramsey's film. In New Zealand, there was a film about a mass shooting called, it was called Out of the Blue, but it was originally called Aramoana, which is the name of the town where it took place. So it's something that kind of seems to lend itself to a cinematic interpretation. But I'm curious what you think what you think the merits or approaches to mass shooting filmmakers could have before we even get into what 22 July does.
I mean, what, just choosing them as a topic for a film?
Choosing them for a topic for a film, but also like, what do you think is interesting about the topic of mass shootings for a film? If you're a filmmaker, if you're a producer, and even if you're a watcher.
I mean, this is it's kind of the crux of my two mindsness of the topic, because on one hand, I think people, in order to make it so it's not just a Tuesday, need to be confronted more and more with the horrors of these events. Mm-hmm. That's one side of me, but at the same time, that can also lead to indifference because it starts to feel normal, unless you're like right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, with this film and with even Michael Moore's the Fahrenheit 11/9,
mm-hmm.
and things like it.
Yeah,
I think they're incredibly powerful. The end to Black Klansman, just whatever, like things with a social message that I think should be heard by a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I worry that, and specifically, I mean, I'll sort of bring it back to this film, but like I worry that something like 22 July is a message that should be heard by a lot of people, but will basically be preaching to the choir.
Right.
And that's a complicated thing. Now, this also might be where the Netflix equation comes in a little bit, because maybe, again, this is guesstimation on my part that I just came up with on the spot, but maybe more people that wouldn't like, because if this is just a theater movie, right? People that disagree or that are on the whatever don't want to deal with it, or maybe side on some more insane points, wouldn't go pay money and go to the movie theater to see this, but they might watch it on Netflix.
Yeah.
Because it's there and it's ostensibly free after your subscription. So maybe that's a sort of hopeful thing from it. But there is, I waffle because you don't ever want to glorify. We've even talked about this with war films.
Yeah.
Like but we are taking it, dramatizing it, and packaging it and selling it as a high drama story.
Right.
I think it's appropriate to try to think if the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah.
And I don't entirely know. And again, I don't want to speak as though I'm maligning the film. I think just to sort of get into my thoughts of the initially watching it, I think it was done incredibly well, incredibly respectful. It had a very, I mean, it was very, his ilk, Greengrass's ilk, like the action was never gratuitous.
Mm-hmm.
It was all in the moment and meant to make you feel like as best you can approximate what you might be feeling in certain moments without leaning on the crutches of like giant action scenes and things and nonsense like that like you might be able to get some shortcuts to emotional responses. This all felt very plotted and very blatant.
Mm-hmm.
And also I will say the movie has a runtime of like 220.
Mm-hmm.
I blinked and it was over.
Right.
Like it moves at a highly effective pace of being for such a heavy topic. And I think all of the aspects of this film, to its credit, sort of lean into that. I believe the acting is very good. I believe the cinematography was the exact right sort of thing that they needed for this story. I feel like the score, for instance, I don't even know if there was a score. I can't even speak to it, but I don't think that's the... If it was there, it worked well hiding itself and affecting me on another emotional level. And if it wasn't there, then it was a good choice to keep it sort of living in the moment.
Right. There was a score.
Yeah.
It was very, it's very underplayed though.
Yeah. But like that's a good choice.
Yeah.
So I think it's an incredibly powerful film. I do just wonder, is it worth making due to the fact that it could possibly, even with all the good it can do, it could possibly even further normalize. It could possibly just turn into another way to tell a story about a tragedy without actually offering any, and not that filmmakers have to, but like any possible solutions or other things. Though I will say, unlike some of the other films we've even listed here, the ending of this film, which we'll get into, I felt like was a strong statement piece, even beyond the regular one we'd get from like a tragedy film.
Right.
And I'll talk about that more as we get there. What about you? I've been yammering. How did this hit you when you first saw it?
Well, the thing, I think the question that I, like initially asked there about like, what do we think the value of this is the same question I asked about war films, for example. And the reason I asked that question is that I guess my viewing of these kinds of films is very different now to, for example, when I saw Elephant for the first time, which is that obviously I watch this as a parent now because there are children being slain.
Yep.
I can imagine, parents of children that were lost in mass shootings would have an entirely different response to this particular film. And the thing that I was thinking about as I was watching it was, do I want, if something like that was to happen to me or someone I knew, do I want the worst moment of my life to be dramatized? And do I want it to be dramatized in a way that is suspenseful?
Yeah.
Because, for me, and again, this is just a sort of a mental exercise here. If this had happened to me or something like this had happened to me, this is the worst day of my life. This is the worst pain I could ever imagine. And I don't think it's fodder for dramatization. I don't think it's fodder for exploitation in whatever way you want to quantify exploitation, whether it's a film made for sale or whether it's actually a think piece about that. But I, as a filmmaker, know that this is the kind of material that is of interest because movies are the ground should be the place where we interrogate topics like this, and we figure out how does it work, and what is it about it that is unique and that we should take away from and learn from in a universal way, because that's what the language of film is for. So to that extent, that's kind of what I was thinking about in terms of like, how would I feel if I was one of the parents of the victims in the Oslo attacks? Especially to the case of a film where the depiction of the killer is noticeably prominent. It should be noted that there is a second film about the Utoya attacks that came out at exactly the same time that doesn't depict the killer at all. It's a Norwegian film called Utoya 22 July. I think it's by Erik. Let me just pull that up. Erik Potte, I believe the name is. Sorry if I've got that wrong. But the take there is that they do a single take 90-minute take of a survivor who is just hearing the events off in the distance. So you never see the killer. You just you're put in the place of being there without having to address the person. And I read an interview with that director who said something along the lines is, I couldn't morally justify putting the killer on screen. And I think that's a really interesting take, because there was one difficult thing that I found watching this film, which is that this mass shooting by I wish I could beep his name out. I hope let's beep his name out
through the magic of technology.
Yeah, let's beep his name out, because the reason I want to beep his name out is that the power that is given to him is through acknowledgement. And he even says in this film, it's not a spoiler, that the third attack, there were 2 attacks on that fateful day. The third attack was to stand up in court and give voice to his ideological position.
Right.
And in a way, does the film continue providing him a voice by existing in some way, or by choosing to focus on what his ideological position, or even just saying what his ideological position is? And there's one thing we've learned about mass shooters is that they're often inspired in copycat form. There were 2 or 3 copycat attempted killings in Poland and in Czechoslovakia based on beep again on what he did. So I think there's a sort of interesting conversation around the right to this film to exist. I think this film should exist. I think Paul Greengrass does an amazing job. I think, all those platitudes we said about, him being a master craftsman, being able to make a film like this is 100% correct. I found the film incredibly difficult to endure. But I was also like, this is why I love cinema, is the ability to transport me into this place and to have me think about these kinds of issues, and to have me think about the ramifications of something like this, in the hope that it offers some healing and some insight and some perspective that I hadn't considered before, or that allows me to kind of carry on into my daily life. And I think this film succeeds in that respect entirely. And I think the way it does that is very fascinating, because it basically takes this one event, which again, at the very beginning of the film, I found a little bit queasy. I found the notion to depict his actions in detail a little bit nauseating, and I didn't want to see it. But what I think is remarkable about the movie is that it then extrapolates the ramifications of what he did in many different facets. It looks at the political argument around it. It looks at the legal argument around it. It looks at the personal consequence of it to the victims. And it looks at the value in giving him a voice. And I think what's, again, a testament to Paul Greengrass's ability as a writer and as a director is his ability to weave all of those ideas into a really compelling narrative, into a really compelling storytelling experience. And it is a powerful experience, one that, is very difficult to watch. In America is going to be even perhaps more so. I wouldn't want to quantify it that way. But is a valuable experience. And one that actually is very, very effective. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think, let's go back to even sort of the first. So the first part of this film is literally showing the entire plan and the execution and the murder of all of those people. And I, too, felt the same way you did while watching it. And I initially, while watching it, this is a film that had me changing my opinion of it as it moved.
Yeah.
Which is always I will call it a welcome occurrence.
Right.
Basically, Well, especially when it ends on me saying like, yes, this was a film that I feel like I gained something from experiencing. There was a sort of knife's edge of horror that this film rode very well. The violence was very real, but never gratuitous. A lot of the fear came from not only what you were seeing, but a lot of way that it was edited and the way the shots were composed. It portrayed the killer in the exact way to sort of make Act 2 and the acts make Act 2 of the film even more terrifying, with this person basically trying to use their newly found, and the only way to put it is platform,
right,
to further their agenda. Even to the point where, like, and the film shows it's an interesting thing because, you know, and I'm not sure what exactly is 100% accurate to the event and what isn't, but like the Prime Minister of Norway was around for one of those first interrogations, and then he realizes that he's there, and that gives the killer sort of a boister of like, oh, like,
I don't think he was in the room.
He wasn't. He was in the back, but he was in the back.
I thought he was in another building watching a video feed.
Oh, I thought he was in behind the glass, because then he like had his like, is he here?
Yeah, I think Brivig says, is he here? But he's not. He's in a holding.
Well, either way, he had a message for him, and he said, "I'm listening."
Yeah,
and that I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And I think that this to watch sort of the machinations of a madman, and there's also sort of the, you know, is he sane or is he insane? That's the whole thing, and neither of us are psychologists, so I mean, he is insane in the sense of his ideologies conflict with that of society,
of an empathetic human being,
and an empathetic and humane society.
Yeah.
So in that regard, yes, he is a psychopath in that regard. But I think that watching the characterization that was done in this film go through the motions of doing the horrible act, thinking you've won in a way because of the thing you did, watching pieces come into play that the killer thinks is exactly what he wants, and then things falling apart for him, not in the way that like an action movie or whatever would do with the villain, but in a very real world way of like the people that he was sort of counting on to continue or back him up or like whatever. And in particular, I guess we're getting into spoilers. I don't know if this even is warranted for that, but there's an alt-right gentleman who they interview to try to prove him sane because he wants to change his plea from insanity to just guilty.
Yeah.
He basically is asked the question of, you know, do you think that he is a leader?
Yeah.
And he's like, no. He's like, there are many more people, way more, you know, organized and whatever. Like, and the alt-right person is trying to make a statement about, you know, how competent their movement is, but it completely chops off at the knees what the killer is saying he's going for.
Right.
And you can kind of start seeing the chinks in the armor, so to speak, at that moment, and then his mother won't come forward, and then no one will come forward, and then the incredibly moving performance by the lead actor, the survivor character, in his testimony in the scene, it's highly effective in a way that I was glad the movie took this turn, even to the we'll get to the end later, but the last conversation that our villain had with his lawyer.
Yeah.
Literally the last bastion of human contact this person has, was so telling and so like it gave me an overall, despite the horrors that I just saw, a catharsis about the future of society, because we're living in a time of just of stupid news punching you in the face and scaring the shit out of you, and and talks of like, you know, a million different people that are trying to destroy what again we think of as actual human behavior. And this film at the end of it, not in a platitude way, and not in a over, you know, a heavy-handed way, but in a very subtle and what I hope is realistic way, basically was saying to me, yes, our system is flawed and people will always exploit it, but at the end of the day, and it might be too late for a lot of people in certain cases, but as far as a society is concerned, society will correct itself in a way. At least that's sort of the way that it positioned itself in the end of this movie for the killers. I'll call it the killer's journey.
Right.
And I pray that is actually I don't pray. I hope that is a truthful fact. I'd like to believe that the world is that, and I choose to live my life in a way that I hopefully moves those ideals forward. And it was very nice for this film, a film of fucking terrors, to end in the way that it did. This is and I'll close that sort of thought with this. This was the first film at the end when it put up like the words like so and so is doing this, that, and the other thing, where I was like, so like actually ingrained and interested and wanted to, like, I was like, what happened to what okay yeah. And we're done. Like it had a very beautiful finite ending to a fucking atrocity. And again, I feel like the restraint shown by the filmmakers means that this is a piece that I think will hopefully do more good than harm in the grand scheme of dramatizing tragedy. And I guess that I mean that's what I hope and that's what I believe, and we will see.
So yeah, and in terms of that first question about, you know, the value of this film doing good or harm, I think there's I can't think of many examples where a film has done outward harm. I think in most cases, you know, films like this have done are very positive. I think the more harm comes from films that don't deal with mass shootings as their central core conceit, but deal with them sort of peripherally and in a way that is kind of backhanded and an excuse for like action scenes or something like that.
And just to clarify my point of harm, I kind of was referring back to, for instance, if this had happened to you or the people that this had happened to is their worst day. Now it has turned into a film on Netflix. That might cause them mental harm.
Of course.
But again, and this is trying to quantify the value of human emotion versus societal shifts and like all this shit. So like, again, kind of impossible, but that's more of what I don't think this film or anything that does something like it will harm society in any way. I think what you said, the films that sort of treat things as throwaway or disposable in this ilk do that.
So I think, you know, there's an interesting, obviously I agree with everything you said about, you know, like the way in which this film treats this issue and treats the surrounding issues. And the thing that I think is interesting, obviously, is that this is not the first time we've dealt with this person on this podcast. In Michael Moore's film Where to Invade Next, they go to a prison in Norway and they talk about this particular prisoner. And they talk about the restorative justice system in Norway, which is very different to America. And I'm reading, I just finished a book called Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, which is about the Equal Justice Initiative, which tries to exonerate people on death row. And it basically talks about, you know, like the sort of punitive, punishment-based form of justice in America versus, you know, restorative justice in other countries, and particularly Norway. Prison system, you know, kind of is a good example of that, where, you know, prisoners are kind of taught to how are they going to re-enter into society, and they obviously don't have a death penalty in Norway either. But what I think is sort of really compelling about this film is that, again, with all that stuff sort of floating in my mind, the film is positing one of the best things I think films can do, which is that forming a dialectic which is not resolvable easily. So it's forming two opposing ideas that don't actually have a clear winner or loser. And I think, and I really enjoy when films have the sort of the wherewithal to try and deal with the abstract like that. And the abstract in this situation is you have a society that functions fairly well, has restorative justice, is a fairly liberal society, ruled by a governing Labor Party, progressive, socially forward, and is confronted with an evil in the way that this film kind of deals with evil that challenges the very fabric of that. Like does the society have to change in response to what this person did? And does our understanding of restorative justice in a place that has no death penalty apply to something where a guy willingly kills 77 people? And it's a really tricky question, because like if you think about, like I said, I was just reading that book, and my views on the death penalty were kind of reinforced. But I asked, a couple of people around me what they think about the death penalty, and they were like, well, generally I don't want to kill people, but I think there are people beyond saving. And it's hard to argue with someone who's experienced profound loss.
Yeah.
To ask to deal with that. And I think that's what this film is kind of dealing with, is how do you reconcile profound loss against the society that believes everyone has an opportunity? And I thought there were a couple of really interesting examples of that in this film. One is the way Geir Lipstad, the lawyer, has to deal with this case.
Yeah.
Now, there's an interesting throwaway line right at the beginning of this where our assailant, whose name I don't want to name, says, "I saw you in a trial, 10 years ago, and I knew one day I'd need a lawyer, and you were the person." And so I went and did some reading, and it was basically a neo-Nazi trial that Lipstad had defended the assailant in that case as well. And he's a progressive liberal, but with some outlandish, well, not outlandish, but some sort of different ideas about the way society should be formed, who kind of realizes that the way people think of him, because he defended a neo-Nazi 10 years ago, means that now this person believes that he is the right lawyer for him. And
right.
And how profound that must be to realize that neo-Nazis look up to you. And that's what Lipstad has kind of in this case, And
I don't want to bring up current events too much, but what just happened with Taylor Swift?
Yeah, being rejected because she encouraged people to vote.
Not even rejected. They don't like it's they used to sort of treat her, because she never said her political leanings.
Yeah.
As one of them.
Yeah.
And now a lot of groups on the internet and things are sort of reeling.
Yeah. Because of that. And I think that's a fascinating thing. I think there's more to that story about Lipstad that the film doesn't quite get into, but I think it does it in the sort of in a case of like, how do we weigh this film correctly? And I think the ending where he says we will always beat you, my children's children will always beat you, is a kind of a victory for the idea that this person can't crack society. They may, be able to throw stones and people will die, but they won't crack the foundations of a society as we understand it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really wonderful. The other side of this is the notion that I think another character says, which is that you can be weak and still strong.
Lara.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's a really beautiful line, because this one character, Ville, believes that he needs to demonstrate his strength in order to defeat this person in court. And I was kind of, again, I don't want to suggest I know what's right and wrong in that situation, but I was kind of thinking that what needs to happen is this person, the assailant, the person, the perpetrator of this crime, needs to see the ramifications of what they've done. And I think they do see it, and it's a really tricky balancing act that this film does, because he does become stronger, but he also demonstrates, he says, these are the things that have happened to me, and this is what you've taken away from me, I don't have the ability to, I don't have much use of my left hand anymore, I'm blind in one eye, I have this piece of shrapnel in my head that could kill me at any moment. I think he needs to see that, because that's what's, the sort of foundation of almost any study of sociopaths and psychopaths is that they have very little understanding of empathy. They, like everyone has radical ideological ideas, but everyone understands that their ideas must be constrained by A, society, and B, natural humanity.
Yeah.
And sociopaths don't have that ability. You don't have to look far in the news today to see examples of that.
Where?
So I think that's another example. I know I'm kind of speaking very broadly here and very long, but what I like about this film is that it's pulling a lot of strands about the consequence of this action. It's not just the action itself, it's what does this action mean? It's ultimately, this is a test to a society, and how does the society respond to it? You could argue that, this is broad as well, is that I think the jury's still out on how well America survived 9/11. I think that there are examples where I'm not exactly sure 9/11 wasn't effective in some way.
Oh, it was effective. I mean, look, what happened then caused the country to galvanize behind with itself and do some good things and do some bad things. It's akin to a body attacking a virus and white blood cells like rushing in and stuff like that. But like with various types of viruses or things like that, sometimes the body overcompensates and causes a lot more problems that you didn't even realize were under the surface until this sort of thing happened. Like, I think. That's an apt question. I think in I would say 100% not entirely, and yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't want to. I'm in no way an expert on Norwegian politics or Norwegian or very much about the country of Norway, and I don't think this film is a definitive statement on the way Norway has reacted to this situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's still an ongoing conversation, I think a manufactured conversation, but a conversation about the European immigration crisis, which is compounded by Brexit in the UK, that I think is the foundation for which problems occur in this film. Like this idea that white supremacy seems to be rearing its ugly head and it's just embedded in society, I think is a very dangerous idea, and it's there. I think that this film depicts a society trying to deal with that question in a sort of and looking at the various ways it does so. And I don't think it has definitive answers. I don't think it has like a bow at the end of this. I think it is just trying to wrestle with that question, and ultimately that's the kind of dialectic that I like in cinema. This there's no right answer here. There's just these two opposing ideas, and which, how do we negotiate that? And that's why I think the film is effective.
Yeah, I do think it does. It definitely doesn't wrap it up with a bow. Like, there's no question. You can't really do that in a film like this.
Yeah.
But I do like the sentiment that it finishes on. And that is, the killer in the room's like, well, maybe I didn't succeed, but people will be inspired by then. And the lawyer's like, well, we'll always beat you. Like, they were like, and you can kind of see through every chink in the killer's sort of armor. If that sentence didn't hit him entirely there, it will.
Yeah.
And because it's just that's what I have to believe.
Yeah.
And because if that's not true for various reasons, you could look at population with mathematical certainties of like how, education versus, tribalism versus, whatever the internet doing, whatever the internet's doing.
Yeah.
I hear recurrently it's making Bowser into a sexy female version of Bowser. That seems to be what's going on. But outside of that, outside of all of the factors, like, we can't predict exactly where humanity will go, but
yeah.
As much as I always make the joke, like, I hate people. Like, I think people irk me.
Yeah.
As living in New York City, you got to be irked by some people. You're very close to a lot of people. But
yeah.
I do believe that when push comes to shove, people and the societies that are made up of them are I won't say good, because good and evil is an odd concept that you can sort of whip around. I will say has a desire to persevere and give and be profitable, or I don't know what the word is, but like be a good place for humans to thrive.
Yeah.
And it's these offshoots that think they have a better way based around whatever their fucking soup du jour of choosing is.
Yeah.
Or the fear of which something is coming to get them.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
the thing you're getting at there is, does a film appeal to our nihilism or our optimism?
This film appealed to, I mean, and films do both.
Yeah.
And this film had a real nihilistic hit for me for about the first 2/3,
Yeah.
and then it did an upswing for optimism.
Right.
And that is a rare thing for a film to be able to do to me.
Right.
And it's why I guess this is my final thought. I think this is 100% worth, if you've been sitting here listening to this entire thing and you hadn't watched it yet, even though you know the history and you kind of know the answer, the moments in this are incredibly powerful. And this is something just sort of on the filmmaking side that I want to touch on before I close. Something that assists and is really kind of the hidden MVP of this film is the way it depicts the survivors. We've been talking a lot about the killer story, the survivors' story, and the family of that, and how it's been going for him and them.
Yeah.
It's incredibly humanizing. You're seeing a slice of life behind stuff that's not overly dramatized. Like, there's some problems with the younger brother that survives, but you don't really get into it. It's just he's generally shell-shocked and completely understandable. They don't like fetishize that or like try to make it like a real thing. And the friendship the main survivor and Laura have is beautiful and realistic and very human. Like, even, and it was lovely because you could tell they had a genuine, like, sort of like that, almost like if nothing had happened on the island based on the way it was shot. Like, you could tell that they were a little bit into each other. And now that this has happened, their bond has changed and shifted, but it's become stronger. So, like, through tragedy, we then come together. That's the hopeful idea.
Yeah.
So small moments like that throughout the film help really solidify what you coined sort of as the optimism in the third act. And I think it's worth everyone to take a morning, afternoon, or evening and check it out.
Yeah, so I think there's the conversation that's interesting around this film is that should the killer be given a voice, given that he says at some point his goal is to have a voice, you know? And what we've seen in I think in mass shootings, in at least my understanding of mass shootings, is that the perpetrator usually feels impotent in some way in terms of having a voice. And I think that this film kind of has that really tricky ground to sort of to stand on, which is that they don't want to shy away from what it is this person did, but don't necessarily want to give them a platform to discuss. And I think the reason that's interesting is I would argue that what's happening in modern politics right now is fringe ideas are being given platforms in the hope of being fair and balanced, I guess is the phrase that you would use. And the counter argument is some fringe ideas are not worth discussing. Now, that's tricky because I believe in freedom of speech, and there's a conversation going around right now about like allowing white supremacists to be, to have speaking venues on college campuses and that sort of thing. And you could argue that that kind of, if that idea of like everyone being able to speak lends itself to more people being inspired by fringe ideas. And that's a tricky thing this film has to deal with. And I hope that the gamble that this film does, unlike the other film about Utoya came out at the exact same time, pays off because it allows our response about those negative ideas to be optimistic because it shows the consequence of those ideas. It's a very, very tricky balancing ground. It's something that I think is really unique. There are a couple of other films. There's a film by Krzysztof Krasowski called A Short Film About Killing, which kind of deals in the same way, which is about a crime versus its consequence. And I think, that's a very difficult thing to do. It's very, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And what I like about seeing Paul Greengrass do it, I really enjoyed Captain Phillips. I think Captain Phillips is kind of a fantastic thrill ride of misery.
Oh, good.
As is United 93. I think it somehow depicts the immediacy of dealing with tragedy. What's great about this film is that all that sort of talent and ability he has to harness the handheld camera, the sort of immediacy of tragedy happening in front of you and never being able to lose your focus. He then shifts all of that into consequence for 2/3 of this film, and he's just as invested in the drama of the consequence of these actions from all angles, from the political fallout, from the legal fallout. I think the legal questions around this film are fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, do you give him a venue to speak? Is he criminally insane? What do we do in a society that doesn't believe in the death penalty and restorative justice? How do they deal with someone who is so immediately, obviously, criminally not suited for that society?
Right.
Like how do you navigate that? And I think it's a real testament to that, to like the human and emotion response to this event. I think this film is fascinating. I can completely understand if this is happened to you or someone or is in the ether, which in the United States is, that just seeing this talked about or just seeing that this is the topic of this film is enough to turn you off and say, look, I just don't need to see this. I completely understand that. But I think the power of cinema, the power of filmmaking, the power of movies like this is that they allow us to confront them in a safe, theoretical way. And I hope, fuck, this is a weird statement to say. I hope I never have to confront anything like this, but I hope that if something like this were to happen around me, I demonstrated some dignity, the same, that this film would help me through that. That's a really weird thing to say. I hated saying that out loud.
I get what you're saying. You're hoping that there is if something absolutely fucking horrendous like this had to occur, not that it had to, but did occur, that there would be something like either this film or something along the lines that would help sort of prevent further occurrences.
It's not just the film; it's the people in this film demonstrated dignity that is profound. That I don't know. Like you don't know if you are capable of that kind of dignity unless you're tested.
Yes, 100%.
And I don't know. I'll say it flat out. I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of dignity.
Yeah. No.
And that's an interesting way to look at this film.
Yeah. Well, this has been the only podcast about the film 22 July. It came out today on the day we're recording this.
Yeah, the 10th of October.
Yep. So, but you'll be hearing our thing Monday. So hopefully a lot of you will have watched it by then. Shahir, when you're not finding films that makes it incredibly difficult for me to do some sort of balancing act of asking where folks can find you, where can folks find you?
You can find me on my website, www.shahirdaud.com. That's SHAHIRDAUD. Matt, when I am equally dumbfounded on like the balancing act of not telling a joke in the face of such tragedy, how can I hand this over to you to plug your podcast, website?
I will happily take it and just tell you that you can find me at matthewkrol.com for my life and works. Also Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. Also check out all the good works that we're doing over on Extra Credits on the YouTubes. And next week, I think are we doing Royale? Are we doing Royale next week? We got the dates mixed up a little bit.
I would like to do Royale. There are a couple of other big films coming out around.
What else is happening?
Oh, I've forgot. I've gone.
Well, they can't be that big.
No, you completely stunted me now. There wasn't. I was like, oh yeah, First Man. First Man's coming out.
I'd rather do Royale, but we'll do a paper rock scissors after this, and we'll figure out what we want to do.
I think we have to do First Man. I think we have to.
Oh, okay.
I mean, what? How could we not do First Man?
I mean, we could not do First Man. I mean, we don't have to not do First Man.
Yeah. I just feel like First Man is going to be a film that generates a lot of conversation that we're going to have to engage. And I want to see it. I like Damien Chazelle. So,
okay. All right. Hey, listen.
It'll be
Listeners, you're just going to have to tune in next week to see what we come up with.
I definitely want to do Bad Times at El Royale. I think First Man is one that we will be doing at some point. So it's not like doing one discounts the other.
Yeah, this isn't Battle Royale. This isn't the Royal Rumble here. Anyway, until then, thank you for listening. Email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com, and we will talk to you next week.
Perhaps at the Royale or perhaps on the moon.
Ooh, such fun venues.
Yeah.
We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.